So I have a question for you. Have you ever wanted to be the villain and just be a truly horrible, horrible person? And do you enjoy drawing cards and playing really long games of Magic? If you answered yes to those questions, boy, do I have a deck for you. Right now with Midweek Magic, the Historic Pauper queues are up. And this is a format I really enjoy playing from time to time. And I pretty much always give this deck a spin. Sometimes I'll play other stuff while I'm doing it, but I pretty much always give this deck a spin because it has a really high win rate and it's really, really fun to play. You just spend a bunch of time drawing cards and watching your opponent realize that they have no chance to win, or you die very, very quickly. Those are usually the things that happen. But like I said, this deck does win quite a bit. So this is Turbo Fog, although that is a misnomer. There's nothing turbo about this deck. We have no ramp, no way to accelerate. We literally are just making our land drops and fogging our opponents out and taking advantage of the fact that there are not a lot of answers to this deck strategy in Pauper. There are a couple of caveats to that. First of all, is that any hardcore control deck with a lot of counter magic, you're probably just going to lose to. You cannot win a counter fight realistically against a deck that's actually trying to control the game, which is going to hit your Clear the Mind. Like if they know and they play around it, or if they can timely counter your fogs, right? So before I get to the deck, just real quick, this deck does really, really well against a lot of the random creature piles or like random brews that people will play in Midweek Magic. It does less good against some of the more established decks. It can still do well, but especially if your opponent's on like the Fairy Miscreant, Ninja the Deep Hour style decks, those are a really hard matchup just because they have pressure plus can counter your timely fogs. The like affinity deck can sometimes be rough because it's so fast, and if you don't have a good opener, it can really get to you. And then, like I said, any hardcore committed control deck, if that exists in Pauper, I haven't really seen it, but if it does exist, it probably is a bad matchup too. Something like Tolarian Terror with counter magic backup is probably not a good matchup for you. But what are good matchups for you? Pretty much everything else. Any like random mid-range pile you win a lot against. So what this deck is essentially trying to do is create a loop with Clear the Mind. And you're going to use this to reshuffle your deck. Being very careful to play around the card, specifically Thraben Charm. But Clear the Mind is going to let you recycle your 10 fogs and all of your card draw. You're playing a very lean land count at 19, but this deck makes its land drop on most turns for about 5 or 6 turns. The reason for that is because Lorien Revealed is really messed up, and we could use it to fetch our lands early into the game. And then later, once we've cleared the mind, or once we've gotten our mana set up, Lorien Revealed turns into one of our best card draw spells as well. This card's absolutely critical in making this deck super consistent. Another card that's really helped is getting access to Ponder on the client. I started with a couple of copies just to test it out in this deck, and by the third match we had played, me and the other person I was working on this with had moved it to 4 copies because this card is incredible. It's pretty much always your best draw. One of the things the deck suffered with sometimes is just not having quite enough digging power to get to the cards you really need to see. And Ponder is a super cheap way to do that. We're getting Preordain on the client too, and I could see that taking the place of some of the weaker card draw options. Witching Well is another reasonable card for this deck. It provides a very, very cheap way to scry to, which helps you set up your draws, and then can convert into actual cards later into the game. I'm not really convinced Preordain would be better in the deck than this, only because going up a card at some point is really important. This deck does need card advantage, and as you slip into more and more of these cantrips, you've got to be careful because of that. You've got to be careful not to run too low on cards that put you up on cards. So we've got the 10 fogs. That's the core, protection of the deck. You want to basically float your life total where you can. So that's kind of matchup dependent. You know how much reach your opponent could realistically have, but anytime you can take 10, 15 points of damage and be able to then start using your fogs and use your early turns to just make land drops, that's really awesome. Sort of acting as a extra copy of a sort of fog is Union of the Third Path. This is really, really important. It's the only white card we're playing, and it's basically necessary to not just auto scoop to your burn matchup, though I don't think you're realistically super likely to beat those. But between Cram Session and Union, you have a shot. Cram Session is our learn card so that we can go get environmental sciences early into the game and make our land drops. and we could get Introduction of Prophecy in the mid game to be able to keep digging. I'm also running a couple of Introduction to Annihilation just to deal with problem permanence. You rarely fetch this. You could probably play 1 copy, but I'm playing 2. And then Pest Summoning is a card that I'm running as a 1-of because occasionally it can be used in the mid game to buy yourself some time that you don't have to fog. This, again, probably could be another one of these, and probably will get replaced by something out of Avatar where we're getting more lessons. Now, I am currently on 2 copies of Stasis Field. This used to be 4 copies of Unable to Scream. And before that, it was 4 copies of whatever the legitimate business person card is. The reason I'm currently on the less efficient Stasis Field is that Modern Horizons 3 makes up a huge portion of the actual historic Pauper metagame. It's a lot of the best cards, Cranial Ram, Nyxborn Hydra, Writhing Chrysalis, all of these cards, and also the Ancestral Mass decks, all use cards that just don't care about what Unable to Scream is doing. Its main purpose is to kind of strip text off of stuff like Thermo Alchemist. But Stasis Field can do that, even if it's less efficient. I could see this card going completely out of the deck, to be honest. I could see it getting swapped around for something else in a future set. This is a card that is like a reluctant you run this. You used it to either buy time in the early game so that you didn't have to fog, or you used it to answer a few specific cards. I still think you need some number of this effect in the deck just to have it, have access to this. But this card hasn't been performing super well. Trying out 2 copies of Cryogen Relic. This was 4 Deduce at one point, and I've kind of trimmed back on those because I just like the big card draw spells. I think you want those and cantrips. I think are more powerful now that we have access to the really, really good cantrips. Cryogen Relic has the minor upside of occasionally being able to tap down a creature so that they can't attack you on the next turn, and therefore acting like a kind of a pseudo fog against like low creature count decks. Card's not great, but it's okay. It's a way to draw 2 cards for 4 mana, split up into payments. I run 1 copy of Compelling Argument. This honestly doesn't need to be in the deck. If you're purely concerned about, I'm going to talk about review while I'm doing this. If you're purely concerned with winning, Compelling Argument probably doesn't need to be in the deck, but at a certain point, you do want to have like a way to slightly speed up the clock because there's a lot of people who just won't concede. And so Compelling Argument is the one of reluctant, like, I would like a way to speed up this game by potentially 5 turns. I was on Didn't Say Please for a while, but the cost of not running Refute is actually pretty big. This card is not incredibly impressive, but being able to cycle dead cards in matchups or extra lands in matchups and stuff like that does give it an edge of consistency that I think is pretty important. The Compelling Argument, there isn't a great card I would be running over it anyways, outside of maybe there's this Ixalan card that's like if you have the City's Blessing, you draw 3 cards for 3 mana, and that card's actually quite good. 1 card left to talk about. Behold is 2 cards. Behold is a way to store mana, to store future cards, because this deck a lot of times will end up with like 8 or 9 cards in hand, and when you get into those spots, you really don't want to leak resources because sometimes you are still in that spot where like you've got 7 cards in hand, but like it's like 4 fogs and, you know, a Stasis Field and like a card draw spell, and you really don't want to get, and like a Refute, and you don't want to get stuck in spots where you can't do a couple of chained card draw spells to find something that you need, usually a fog, pretty much always a fog, but sometimes like a Union of the Third Path. Behold the Multiverse's Foretell is a way to kind of store that down the road. If you wanted to make these Cryogen Relics more Beholds, I also wouldn't hate that. It's a little clunky because you could just play the Relic out, like Deduce and Relic you could just play on curve and then cash in later. But it does come at the cost of being worse as a card draw spell and not being able to sandbag in the Exile Zone. So still running a couple of copies of these, just kind of working on the draw suite of this deck. It's stuff that I could see changing a little bit of. 4 copies of Lure Revealed, of course. And then finally, I have 1 copy of Treasure Cruise. And this is a card I actually would consider going up to 2 of if I eventually get on more cantrips. But I'm running 1 copy of Treasure Cruise because 1, it's a bad draw, right? You see most of your library in most games. And being able to exile, you know, a land that gets into the graveyard, the cram sessions, these environmental sciences, things like that, being able to get those out of your deck. And also, in addition to that, at a certain point, you don't want these Unions of the Third Path against a lot of matchups. You don't want Cryogen Relics after the first pass through. You don't want some of these other cards. So you can use these treasure cruises to kind of selectively work your way down to only having fogs and the best draws. So that way everything you draw is either a fog or more draw. So you don't want to do that a ton. So I don't want to play a bunch of copies of Treasure Cruise. I could see running a second copy though. This card's historically crazy powerful. And once you get to a point in the game where you can cast this for 1 mana, even if you only do it once, it would be worth having it in your deck. The big advantage I think that this deck has with Lorien Revealed though is just being able to play like 19 lands, but we pretty much always make our land drops. You always cycle Lorien Revealed early into the game and you get your deck thinned out of your lands and then you shuffle them back in, and then later Lorien Revealed at like 7, 8, 9 mana, you're able to use them as draw 3s. So yeah, really, really fun deck. Highly recommend giving it a shot. It's super fun. So just trying something different in terms of content, and I'll see how this does. I just wanted to throw this out there because this is a deck I've been working on for a while and I really enjoy playing it. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you for coming to my TED Talk.